comedy isn't just entertainment, but a soul's way of speaking truth to power. Some may say humor is a shield, but for others, it's a sword sharpened by awareness. Stephen Colbert's natal astrology illuminates his unique evolutionary call to illuminate truth through intelligence, irony, and humility. And I would strongly emphasize humility. But let's take a look at Stephen Colbert's chart. Welcome. I'm Sarah Christensen from One Sage's View Astrology, and I'm going to be diving into Stephen's chart today to kind of get an insight into sharing how powerful his natal chart is from the planetary placements of May 13th of 1964. And you will see why he has a powerful, I would call it maybe like a mirror of understanding something that is beyond him, not just, he represents an archetype. And he also is speaking back something to every individual who tunes into him and registers something through the humor that he shares. And the humor that he shares is something very powerful because it gives the individuals who are tuning into him, I think, hope and a way to look at some facts of difficult stories of our time that we are living through and experiencing right now. And there is something to be said about the power of humor. And I really think there's also something to be said about the power of the writing that Stephen Colbert has done in his life as the level of satire that then brings up the more important subjects for millions when they're exploring the themes that he covers. We may be laughing, but on the inside, we're definitely registering he's speaking to some truth that we are all experiencing, and that has definitely in his deeper perspective of this situation, that maybe on the face there is humor, but below, underneath it all, is a deep empathy for the human experience. And also his intelligence has given it a spin so it can be easily absorbed and quite frequently. And then it then can help, I think, others have a moment to consider the facts of the situation. And that's his moon in Gemini. So I think all of this is very interesting to explore. And it's important to keep in mind that Stephen Colbert has a rectified chart. We have a 10:02 p.m. chart. I've done a rectification. I think that's a pretty good chart, and there's several reasons why. I will dive into the rectification of why I chose this time versus, say, other times that we might explore. There is another time that is also quite good. And it's for 10:30 p.m. on May 13th of 1964. You could probably argue either chart. I do like the 10:02 p.m. better for a certain few reasons because of some very specific big experiences in his life. Of course, I haven't dove in for hours and hours of fine-tuning the rectification, so it may emerge that I might choose another time. But based on the, I would say, 4 or 5 hours that I've been working with this chart, that I would argue that this is a decent chart. So let's dive in. All right, let's take a look at Stephen Colbert and his natal astrology. So here is Stephen Colbert's natal chart. And of course, as I mentioned before, this is a rectified chart for 10:02 p.m. on May 13th, 1964 in Washington, D.C. This is a Placidus chart, as I'm an evolutionary astrologer. That's my primary. And we're using the mean node, which is the focus that my master teacher, Stephen Forrest, uses as well. And so we're looking at the natal chart. What I think is interesting, as I mentioned before, is that his ascendant here, that I think is probably close to his actual ascendant, is 16 degrees of Sagittarius, where the Sibley chart for the United States of America is 13 degrees of Sagittarius. So it's kind of an interesting close relationship to how he's tied into the United States and the United States politics, not just in the present moment, but if you go back in Stephen Colbert's career, you will see other moments in time where he's really tied closely through his humor, satire, to the political landscape and what's going on in themes. Also, I think is important is right here in the first house is the South Node. So this tells me that Stephen's focus is to evolve his identity, how he thinks of himself, and his Saturn holds the rulership for that South Node in Capricorn, and his North Node tells us that he's leaning into a life that's evolving based on having a partner in life and what they can reflect back to him about the family. And also, and as you can see, he has Venus there that sweetens that in life at some point. And also, the moon is in Gemini. And so with the moon in Gemini, it's kind of a way that North Node can operate. So it's a lens for how he might have before he found his wife, and I think her name is Evie, Evelyn Evie. And before he found his wife, I think that would be something that he would maybe get from looking at his relationship to partners, that he was maybe looking to find a long-term partner. And I believe if you go back in his books, there's actually, and I don't know if it was just a book or if it was something he may have done on the stage in his comedy or in any other form, but about what he learned about being in relationship with women. So there's some kind of learning there that's going on as well. And but when he speaks about his wife Evie and how he shows up with a long-term relationship in his life, it gives you perspective of how love can kind of open up for someone and be a new way of seeing themselves through the lens of what he creates with that spouse, right? So that's a really important detail for Stephen's life. And so that's kind of what he's evolving. He's evolving that awareness of other and kind of that softening aspect. But through the wit and humor is an avenue for also how that might show up. There's also that moon, which is responsible for the North Node, is also in Gemini, which then pulls us down to the Mercury. The Mercury would be the ruler of the Gemini, and the Mercury in Taurus is in, again, we see this the power of mutual reception, because that Mercury in Taurus is in a strong communication with the spouse and the moon. So the soul is kind of really focused there on other. And if you go back in Stephen's life story, we'll understand that after the major events in 1974, when they lost his father and his two brothers in an airline accident, I think when they were approaching through Charleston, South Carolina, that changed his life forever and his family and his mother. But it would be that he kind of grew up kind of wanting to take care of his mother during that time, from the age of 10. So there's a lot of perspective to understand how young he was, and then how he also at the same time would dive into literary works, and like I believe it's Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit from Tolkien, and how that world was his escape into kind of a place that to this day frames the identity for anyone who follows and has been following Stephen Colbert will understand his passion for the arts that his mother also gave him, and the just his literary intelligence that he brings to life, and that he shares often on the stage as the host of the Late Show. So some important points in his chart. Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, we are very interested in what is the North Node, South Node of the moon and the moon itself, but also the placement of Pluto. Now, Stephen was born with Pluto in Virgo. He's also born in the period of time when Pluto and Uranus were conjunct. And in that conjunction, now the actual conjunction, I believe, was in 1966 when they were absolutely brand new cycle. So he's born at a period of time when Uranus is stationing from being retrograde. So it's stationing direct. So it's stationing direct to go into that conjunction with Pluto, right? When he's born. That sets the stage for Stephen Colbert's natal chart will have that Uranus in Virgo accentuated because it's stationing, it's standing still in the sky. Not everybody pays attention maybe to the fact that that's stationing, but I think very skilled astrologers will pay attention to that in the nativity. When you understand when those outer planets are stationing and how they are positioned in the chart as a whole, it will tell you a lot more about the consciousness and the life, what's going to be planned in the life in terms of sudden experiences and just kind of where kind of like if almost probably from his point of view or anybody who has this kind of experience of Uranus can have like it almost feels like the divine coming in and touching your life in a positive or negative way, and it can play out negative at first maybe or vice versa. I can think it really depends, but the way it's positioned in Stephen's chart, I would say that it gives the shape of how his consciousness will be shaped when he's young, because that Uranus is trying not only to his south node, it gives him like the experience of doing something again because it's trying, so he has the skill here, it will come in again, or it's being given to him through something, right? So, but that's steady through the life. That's a Uranus that kind of just it's stationed in his birth chart. So it's just really potent in energy. And Mercury is the ruler of that, but also in the early degrees of an earth sign. So those literary works stabilized him. They gave him a sense of stability even in the fiction form. So that coupled with the Mars there, the Jupiter there would accentuate that as part of his those are more personal planets, Mars and Jupiter. In addition, that frames also his south node. So this is kind of something from the past, but also he's re-experiencing something. It's almost like a soul who had this experience in the past, but this is an opportunity to reframe it in a different context and with the supporting factor of the moon being on the north node. It's almost like if this was framed with the moon on the south node, it would have much more detrimental factor, meaning he would have never been able to emerge out of the grief of the experience of the passing of the father to the degree that he has in this life. That moon in his chart in Gemini gives him the cutting wit of humor. And with that, it's the cutting wit that actually can save him, and his evolutionary intention of understanding, like putting all of his focus into the way that humor could help him support his mother in her grief of the loss of his father and her husband. So it's an interesting combination of planetary placements in Stephen's chart, because the Uranus is like not something he controls at all. It's almost like this is the script, and this will play out in a very dynamic way. He'll have more than one experience, but the biggest one was the moment he lost his father and his brothers. That would be the life-defining moment. There will be other life-defining moments, and this will be in the background of those moments, right? Because we can move on. The grief is just, as we move through the years, it gets framed in different experiences as you try to live your life. I really think if there's anyone who would understand grief at a deep level, it might be that Stephen Colbert definitely has that. And with that comes a great humility for what he had to experience and what he had to understand about life at such a young age, and into a young boy and going into his teenage years, adolescence, and into his young adult life, right? His faith, which is interesting me with the Uranus and the Pluto in the ninth house of beliefs, is, I think, a good frame, because this whole thing of experience of that accident that occurred from long distance travel for his father. And that Uranus is opposite the Saturn, which we would um, consider for the father figure. But we could also say the sun is also a father figure. That could be also articulated as symbolism there. And that sun is opposite the Neptune as well. But I think this is the more powerful one because it's the South Node storyline, right? So they're both kind of playing into that. So where will young Stephen Colbert, when he's 10 years old, frame his projection of what would normally go to the projected image and idea of the father figure? Where would it go? He went into supporting his mother and growing up really fast, having to mature a bit from that experience in ways that most people can never fathom. And then also how diving into the stories and the characters and what that embedded into his consciousness as a young boy. These are very important. Another super important position in his natal chart is the natal Pluto. And this is something I was talking about. The Gen X generation is Pluto in Virgo. And when you have Pluto in Virgo, you have a generation that is looking at the purification of the soul, the purification of the ego through Virgo. Absolutely happening when you look at the life experience that Stephen Colbert had as a young boy at 10 years old, losing 3 family members like that. But his Pluto, and this is where I think it's really powerful in terms of the Pluto was retrograde when he was born. But if you do a progression 10 days after he was born, the Pluto goes direct. And so literally it's like the moment, the year, day for a year kind of concept with progressions. When he was 10 years old, it'd be when he was 10 years old when that Pluto would station direct and give, and that would be a great planet to kind of look at the moment, but also maybe Mars and Saturn and Uranus during the moments leading up to that accident kind of affirms the power of the Pluto changing direction from the progressed chart. I think also is the power of his midheaven, and if I'm not mistaken, there is in another article that another astrologer had written up that 5 degrees of Libra is a very powerful point related to the accident. And I'll have to go back and look on that. And I'll do a deeper dive on that as well. But I wanted to focus mostly on the evolutionary astrology in this particular video. We have multiple things that are speaking to the history just from the natal chart, just from his natal chart, but also having an awareness that there's a chart behind the chart, and the chart behind the chart is essentially the nodal story. And the nodal story is the intention of the soul as it's understood and described through the symbolism and the placement and the rulers of the South Node and the North Node, and then also Pluto. What is Pluto telling us about the life? What is it in relationship to other planets? And what is it in relationship to other outer planets? And in this case, we know that he's born in the 60s during an era of rebellion and revolutionary things happening across the globe, but definitely in the United States as well. So Stephen Colbert is life story, born in Washington, D.C., of all places, right? It almost magnifies this moment that we're in and observing Stephen Colbert and understanding there's so much to understand in his life and what it symbolizes and what it may be reflecting back to us, because when we're in observing someone else, we're gaining insights into something for ourselves, for the landscape that we are in on a collective level. Sometimes we can look at more, charts of people who don't have such a significant influence into, say, a zeitgeist, and we're definitely able to see just the current story of the loss, the cancellation of the Late Show. A lot of people get upset about that because that's their entertainment. They don't like to have their entertainment changed, right? And if they like a certain personality like they do with Stephen Colbert, then it can really, I think it can emphasize a bigger story. So you look at what's behind the scenes with this story, you can see a reality of the oligarch, the tech oligarch, and the billionaire, and how the billionaire son is the owner of the media parent company that went through the merger and then made the decision based on maybe influence from the president, number 47, that would cancel the show, right? Influence to influence. So we're getting the theme of the oligarch power, Stephen Colbert's position as an authority figure, and how he communicates with the Saturn in Pisces, and maybe having a wound there, and then that rebellious positioning, and how the humor shapes his identity. He has a certain power behind him with the Jupiter in the Taurus, the Mars in the Taurus, the Mercury in the Taurus. There is stability in Stephen's chart, and it comes through how he will language things, his perception, how people will perceive him, and his identity that he has shaped as a father and someone who's long time married. So from a conservative point of view, and he's a Catholic on top of that, so he has a strong faith. And I don't think anyone who has empathy would argue that Stephen Colbert has a life that he's framed for himself based on that loss, and that early loss, where he's created the stability for himself through his work, of course. But it's because of his beliefs. It's because of how he frames things by his faith, and that gives him a certain stability. It's so ironic, isn't it ironic? He's the image that a lot of the things that, or even the people that would look up to the current administration, thinking that they're on the right side of history in some way, in a positive way. It's such an interesting juxtaposition, isn't it? To look at that, to kind of yeah, he's a family man, and he's still in love with his wife. He shows up with his wife in a loving way. That we can see, of course. I mean, I'm sure that as any family, there's things that they have to wrestle with as well. But I also think there is a certain humility and wisdom that comes through Stephen Colbert's experience with so much grief and how he had to navigate that at such a young age. I think it's fascinating to look at the natal astrology and what the mission is in life, but also kind of understanding from what we get from evolutionary astrology gives us, and where is the ruler of the North Node? And what does it tell us about the person and what they're trying to lean into, and more than likely will be successful in that endeavor to achieve that, but they will have experiences that will frame lots of challenges to realize that evolutionary intention. I hope that makes sense. This is just the natal seed of potential, right? All the souls all those in his family, his what I call the original family, mother, father, and all his 11 siblings or something. I think there's quite a few siblings he has. It frames the context of what he's going to experience. And he's the youngest, I believe. His moon is also 24 degrees of Gemini, and that is also framed as a square with these two outer planets. But also, I would say that the Uranus gets pulled into the Pluto, and that is a square because of the 10 degrees ish. It's a little over 10 degrees, right? That's 13 degrees difference. I still think that bears some kind of influence because of how powerful that is, being a stationary planet. And also the squaring off with just the self and other, if that's truly the angle of his chart, right? So these are very powerful. What else I want to cover before I wrap up is that the importance of having a true birth time would solidify what we're learning here. So we have a rectified chart. So we want to always keep that in mind. The power of the opposition that he's experiencing with these outer planets from his Saturn. Now, some people have mentioned, oh, he's in his Saturn return. Yes, and I would argue that the entry of Saturn into Pisces would actually show more that kind of unexpected, maybe the catching wind of the story, the merger that was going to happen, maybe that hit behind the scenes before it would change up. But there's something else I think and that would be in the contractual agreement, because ninth house would be potentially not legislation, but legal actions. But his opponent would also be seventh house. So any opponent he would have in any kind of contractual agreement is in there. But I think it's powerful to keep in mind that there are other things going on that aren't visible within his life experience, because we only get what they show us, right, to a degree. But we have a lot of backstory because of his willingness to share and be interviewed and things like that. The other important thing that I want to wrap up this video with is that other progressed planets in there, we're not talking about progressions totally, but we know that we would have progressions through the spiral of life over time. And registering when those are happening is a key kind of framework for understanding those big events that frame for Stephen Colbert and bring him towards where he is in this moment now. But in this moment now, he still has a couple of things that are active in his experience. He is currently 61. He turned 61 this year in May. So he, by timing of life, he will, I don't know when the exact last show is. The Saturn return will be long gone by the time that happens. He may be registering things internally that through this year and into next that frame that Saturn opposed his Uranus and Pluto in his chart, from an internal dialogue he may have with that separation of something he's loved to do. But he also has the separation kind of not just from that promise, because it's almost like a reflection of Stephen Colbert's Uranus to the Saturn from his childhood, realized with the loss of his father, to another separation with another authority figure, which would be the parent company of the show, that, the decision makers, basically the authority figures that were the deciding factors of whether the late show would exist or not in the coming years, right? So it's fascinating to see what will be created. That Saturn in transit completely leaves, because Saturn is back in Pisces right now, finishing off through its retrograde before it positions a new cycle with Uranus starting on February 20th. And we will have a view of the shows that Stephen produces in this period of time, all the way through that last, I don't know how, they're pretty much done, recorded every day because of how frequently they show. So how far those go out and recording up to that last day that he's recording, right? And there are other things happening in his progress chart that shows other dynamics that are happening as well. There's something else behind the scenes that you can see in his progress chart. there are other things that will come. So it's going to be so interesting to see what might emerge when we have a new cycle with the Saturn and the Neptune in Aries on a world point, because that will be down at the bottom of his chart. So I think it'll be behind the scenes, but it brings in the ruler of the Aries about that. And so to me, that's his creative works, what he will creatively put together and be writing, because the Mercury is so close to that Mars. And then also how interesting it will tie into the literature that he knows, just embedded in who he is. And then how then that comes out in some kind of creative work that he does and sets the stage for more of a soul's evolutionary path towards understanding himself with others. I think he had an incredible experience when the show was canceled, and then right after they understood that, winning the show, winning the Emmy. And within that moment, I don't know if he believed they could win, but I think it really changed something within him. And immediately he was offering up that there are people that work for him. So he's focused on the other people, that they're up for work. They're looking for a new opportunity. And he mentioned it in his Emmy speech, right? This is a person who is, had a lot of dose of humility, things that would humble him, and he's leaning into others. He's a fascinating individual, and I hope in some time that we will get more details on his true birth time through the birth certificate of some note. I don't know if that will ever emerge, but that would be great to learn someday. I'm excited to maybe do a little bit more drill down on his chart relative to some fixed stars and to the other kind of progressed charts and looking in the ephemeris in the community. And I think you'll enjoy that, because there's a lot that you can learn from studying his chart. And there are many archetypal images that come up within the context of Stephen Colbert's chart. And, it's just fascinating, because when I was finishing up on preparing for this video, I couldn't help but think of this one little scene in The Matrix. I don't know if you guys are seen The Matrix. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. It was also a popular movie. But in the movie, I have to read this because it's so good. And I could there will be a clip, a link below with the clip. I'm not going to post the clip, but I want to just read what the Oracle said to Neo in the movie The Matrix. And it made me think about the soul's intention, the evolutionary intention. And I even mentioned it in my last video briefly about, when do we make that choice? When is that free will choice made as a soul, right? And so I keep thinking on this for some reason. It's like kind of like looking at something outside of the context of making that conscious choice while you're in the body and having an experience in life. So in the movie The Matrix, the Oracle, who Neo, the main character, goes to see, sits down with her, and she says to Neo, she says, "Bad news is there's no way you can really know whether I'm here to help you or not. So it's really up to you just to make up your own damn mind to either accept I'm going to tell you or reject it." Then she offers, candy. Do you want any candy? And then Neo says, you already know if I'm going to take it. The Oracle wouldn't be much of an oracle if I didn't. And then Neo says, but if you already know, how can I make a choice? And then the Oracle says, because you didn't come here to make the choice. You've already made it. You're here to try to understand why you made it. The Oracle, I thought you'd have figured that out by now. I love it. I love the arts. And I think they're so important because they give us something to reflect on. I just enjoy so much the archetypal images and what they bring to us and how we can self-reflect. And that's what the arts give us, right? An opportunity to reflect and ponder something deeper about our own humanity. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this video and have a great rest of your week. Please subscribe if you haven't, and thank you for watching the entire video, and look forward to hopefully enjoying your company inside the coming community. I'll be launching it in late November. Thanks so much. Take care.